Carl DeMaio versus Scott Peters. It's one of the most watched congressional races in the country. You've heard their ads. Now see them face to face. 10 News anchor Steve Atkinson asks the tough questions. 10 News presents the 52nd Congressional District Debate. Brought to you by Alvarado Hospital.
Hello and welcome. Congressman Scott Peters and Carl DeMaio are ready to debate the issues. They will be asked questions from our panelists. LaDonna Harvey from Kogo Radio is here, along with former Mayor Jerry Sanders, who is the president and CEO of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, our partners in this debate. Now, first, we have opening statements. A coin toss determined that Carl DeMaio would go first. And Carl, you have 1 minute with your opening statement starting right now.
Thank you so much, Steve. And this is such an important election. I'm running for Congress because I believe we need a new direction in Washington, focusing on fixing our nation's financial challenges, getting people back to work by creating quality jobs, and by holding Congress accountable, making sure that Congress lives under the same laws as the rest of us with no special privileges, no special exemptions. In the last debate, Scott Peters denied taking perks that many members of Congress and many politicians have voted themselves over the years. And I think that this is a fundamental issue in this campaign. While our political leaders give themselves benefits, they take away important programs from us. In that debate, Mr. Peters claimed that he never took $69,334 in car allowance payments at taxpayer expense. Scott, here are the city financial records showing that you cashed $69,334 in car allowance payments in 6 years. Can you explain the comments that you made at the last debate denying this fact?
Mr. Peters, you have 1 minute now.
Is that the opening statement?
That's the opening statement.
I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I ran for Congress in 2011 when Congress had hit a low point. The Tea Party wave had hit. Congress couldn't agree on a budget, and they waited so long to pay our national debts that our credit got downgraded as a nation for the first time ever. To me, that was unacceptable. I ran on the concept of no budget, no pay. The idea is that if Congress doesn't do its job and pass a budget, they don't get their paychecks. We passed that law in Congress. We passed the first budget out of Congress in 2 years, and we stopped government shutdowns. And we've made a lot of progress for San Diego. I've taken a problem-solving approach there. We passed a law to lower the cost of student loans. We passed a law to allow small businesses to compete for federal contracts. We brought over hundreds of millions of dollars to San Diego for infrastructure and for jobs. And we've started the Military Transition Support Project, which is a nation-leading program to match veterans with community support for jobs, job skills training, and personal counseling. And with your support, I'll continue to work for a Congress that America deserves.
Mr. Peters, thank you. Your time is up. Okay, here are the rules. The first candidate to receive a question from our panelists gets 1 minute to answer. The second candidate then gets a 30-second response, and the first candidate then gets a 30-second rebuttal. LaDonna has our first question, and it goes to Scott Peters.
Scott, ISIS is a growing threat, as I'm sure you're aware, and San Diego is currently ranked 4th on the terrorist watch list when it comes to known or suspected terrorists. So what do you do to make sure that more of those Homeland Security funds come here to protect this border or this area?
1 minute.
Well, that's an excellent question. There's more. This is a very, very serious threat. I mean, these are people that are even much more dangerous, lethal, and strategic than the folks who took down our buildings and killed so many thousands of Americans. I believe in a multi-strategy approach, but starting in Iraq with a government that is stable and political, because we can't do that for themselves. We can't do that for them. They have to have a stable government. We need allies in the region. Those countries in the region who are concerned, they need to contribute. We need international allies around the world who are as worried about terrorism as America is. And I think ground strikes was the appropriate approach. And then ground troops, not American ground troops, but training troops on the ground to be able to deal with that threat. And then we have to budget correctly for developing those threats here. But I think the appropriate strategy is to start there and make sure that it doesn't travel. The other thing I'd say is that Juan Vargas and I dropped a bill that would give the Secretary of State the ability to revoke passports of people who go over there to fight for ISIS. Those people should be treated as though they committed treason.
Mr. Peters, I'm going to have to cut you off there. Mr. DeMaio, you have 30 seconds.
Well, San Diego is a military town, and we know firsthand that ISIS is a major national security threat. And when we send our service members overseas, we have to back them up with a credible, effective plan. Mr. Peters has been on record saying that he supports the president's approach. And yet people such as former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, even former President Jimmy Carter, have said that Mr. Obama's plan is insufficient. When you're the left of Jimmy Carter, Mr. Peters, you're out of step with San Diego.
Mr. Peters, 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, what I think you heard Mr. DeMaio say says that he doesn't support the plan of our commanders. He's got his own band of retired military, but I've listened very hard to the commanders. We took a lot of briefings about exactly how to deal with this threat, and I think the steps we've taken are appropriate. Any further involvement would require additional congressional action, but I do support the steps that our commanders have recommended and that Congress and the President have worked on together.
Okay, our next question comes from Jerry Sanders. It will be for Carl DeMaio, and you will have 1 minute to answer. Mr. Sanders.
San Diego is a home to three major industry clusters, defense, tourism, and the innovation economy. These are known as the traded economies. What policies have you supported to ensure that these industries thrive?
We have to get an economic approach in this country that really restores the American dream. I started my company right out of college from scratch. I had student loans that I was paying off, and I had to figure out how to make a small business succeed. 20 years later, the opportunities that were available to me are not available to the next generation. I'm fighting to make this economy revitalized again, to create middle-class jobs. We have to reform our tax system so people pay a fair share, that we buy down the rates by closing the inappropriate loopholes that big corporations have been able to get, that Mr. Peters has supported. Second, we have to cut red tape on small businesses by making government mandates easier to comply with. And third, we have to improve K through 12 education so we have a workforce that has the skills necessary to get 21st century jobs. For the clusters that you just mentioned, science, technology, engineering, and math, so important for the high-tech, biotech, and the advanced engineering issues that we're trying to tackle in our defense sector. All these things are part of my economic program to revitalize jobs in San Diego.
Mr. Peters, back to you.
Sure. Well, I'll address the question on the three traded economies. Obviously, I joined the Armed Services Committee because not only is San Diego a partner in our national defense, but we want to make sure we get the economic benefit out of that as well. It's about a quarter of our jobs. But I've really been a committed advocate for National Institutes of Health funding, which, by the way, has created the 2 treatments for Ebola right up there on the Mesa, because we've been giving scientists grants to solve these problems. I'm also an opponent of the medical device tax, which I believe should be repealed, and I've voted against that. And I'm a supporter of mobile technology as a way to provide health care, even through cell phone technology, that will provide better care at lower prices.
Mr. DeMaio, 30 seconds.
Again, this is really about restoring our middle class. Mr. Peters, in 2010, backed the largest tax increase in the history of San Diego. And it wouldn't hurt big business. No, it was a sales tax. It would hurt the working poor and the middle class and small businesses. I stood up to Mr. Peters' plan, and San Diegans overwhelmingly supported a rejection of that tax increase. And then I went on to author the Small Business Regulatory Relief Plan, and we got bipartisan approval for my proposal to cut red tape on the city's business improvement districts. I'm running on a record of results of helping create jobs, cut red tape, and move our economy forward.
Gentlemen, thank you. Back to our panelists now, and to LaDonna Harvey for our third question for Scott Peters.
Well, Scott, you mentioned Ebola. That's another threat, of course, that I think many Americans are worried about. ZMapp is the drug that you were talking about, an experimental drug that was developed here with a company based in San Diego. It's government funding, though, that really funded that and other experimental drugs for sicknesses like Ebola. So how do you keep those government dollars flowing when it really matters?
Well, it needs to be a priority, and I actually won an award from something called the California Healthcare Institute for my advocacy of funding for the National Institutes of Health. You know, I went to the Salk Institute a while back, and I got a briefing from some of the top scientists in the country who happen to be working here in San Diego on projects like Ebola, and they told me it takes until you're about 40 years old to get the lab where you can compete for the grant. And even in the good times, about 25% of those grants were funded. So even good times, it was a 75% failure rate. Well, today, because we haven't kept up with funding, only about 7% of those grants get funded. At the same time that other countries are investing, China, Singapore, Brazil, England, Israel. And young scientists are thinking, is this really the place where we can do our science? We're going to lose our lead in science if we don't invest. We have to make that a priority. It's something I've committed to, my opponent won't commit to. But it's also very important for the San Diego economy because each one of those labs is a small business supporting jobs here in San Diego.
Mr. DeMaio, 30 seconds.
Well, I agree with Scott. We do need to support our long-term research and development programs as well as private sector solutions, biotech solutions, and that will help us address some of these diseases. But Scott, This is a crisis today. We're talking in the next 72 hours, the next week, where this could get completely out of control. That's where we need effective leaders in Congress who are going to stand up, speak out, and ask tough questions. I do not believe that this administration has formulated an effective policy for dealing with the Ebola outbreak. I believe that many members of Congress have been silent on this, doing a wait-and-see attitude. San Diegans, Americans deserve more. We have to be looking at changing flights, better monitoring by CDC,
Mr.
better
DeMaio,
controls.
I'm going to have to cut you off there. Your time is up. Mr. Peters, back to you for 30 seconds.
Well, we need a three-part approach to dealing with Ebola. We need to make sure we prevent people from getting on the planes who have Ebola. We want to make sure that we care for them when we're here, and we have to develop a long-term solution. We can't be reacting, we should be reacting, of course, to each crisis, but we have to be prepared, and that's the importance of long-term investment, which the Tea Party has gotten in the way of. These across-the-board cuts that the Tea Party imposed on us in 2011 have really put a large obstacle in our way. So we do need better protocols, and we need to do more to make sure that people in West Africa aren't getting on planes, but we do need a long-term strategy as well.
Okay, back to our panel once again, and a question from Jerry Sanders. This one will first go to Mr. DeMaio.
Polls show voter confidence in Congress is extremely low. Do you think the polarization of Congress is getting better or worse? And what would you do, or what have you done to combat that polarization?
This is one of the most important issues in this campaign. I think polls show that we have low confidence in Congress because Congress isn't doing its job. It's not working on the issues that matter to the American people. They're fighting amongst themselves rather than fixing problems. Mr. Peters has said something quite remarkable in his opening statement. He said that when he was elected to Congress, he passed no budget, no pay, and because of that, he ended government shutdowns. Scott, on your watch, there was a very big government shutdown. It was the wrong thing to do. And the reason why that shutdown occurred is because you supported a bill that was called no budget, no pay, but in fact allowed members of Congress to continue to receive pay and to be reimbursed for pay even though they shut down the government. We all know that the budget analysts said that the government shutdown cost more than keeping the government open. That's why people can't stand Congress. And instead of getting their jobs done, instead of being held accountable, instead of living under the same laws as the rest of us, they are completely unaccountable. They give themselves perks and privileges while leaving problems for the rest of us.
Congressman, 30 seconds for your response.
I was an ardent opponent of the government shutdown. Mr. DeMaio knows that very, very well. He did not speak out. It was his party, the Republican Party, who shut this down because they were trying to repeal the health care law. It was after we reopened the government that we passed the budget and we stopped government shutdowns. I hope we won't have another one, but it won't be because I supported it. Look, I've been the fourth most independent Democrat in Congress. I've been someone who's walking the walk of working across the aisle. I'm one of 5 Democrats supported by the United States Chamber of Commerce because they say a Democrat is someone who can help job creation. It's that kind of bipartisanship that's going to break this gridlock.
Back to you, Mr. DeMaio, 30 seconds.
Again, you can't say that you're for no budget, no pay when you support a bill that allows members of Congress to continue to get paid and get reimbursed for their pay even though they miss their budget deadline time and time again and they shut down the government. This is Washington doublespeak for you. You got a politician who says they've done something when in fact when you take a look at the details, it's smoke and mirrors. It's time for honest leadership, it's time for real results. And in Washington, I believe that we can have people, if they're held accountable for results, come together and do the right thing. Starting with no budget, no pay for real, that would be a great foundation for dealing with these budget issues and bringing people together.
Gentlemen, thank you. And we're going to have more of this debate right after this quick break. Stay with us.